Here.
Commissioners Andrews and Hayon will be absent today. And are excused. Before we begin, as a result of Commissioner Hayon and Commissioner Andrews being absent today, we are going to defer the executive director's evaluation. I think it makes sense for us to have that evaluation when we have more commissioners present. The first item on the agenda is public comment on matters appearing and not appearing on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Espinola Jackson, and so it's 4 of you there. I'm still getting the papers together for you. Thank you. Last week I went before the Civil Service Commission, and the statement that's here that I'm giving to you is the same statement that was presented to them. It's concerning the news article that you have before you about Mazzola and his statements that he had made. Dear Chairperson, the Black Human Rights Leadership Council of San Francisco is a coalition of dozens of community leaders that came together in 2012 in order to promote opportunity and fairness for Black San Franciscans. Recently, we have been focused on issues pertaining to housing and employment. Last week, we raised the matter that concerned both of these issues in San Francisco Civil Service Commission, and we will raise the same matter with you. We have many members who live in dilapidated conditions in public housing who have indicated to us that there's no maintenance occurring on housing authority sites. Now we know why. It was reported in last week's San Francisco Chronicle, what you have before you, that the Airport Commissioner, Larry Mazzola from the Plumbers Union, have filed legal actions against the housing authority because the agency wants to use local hire to do work instead of his plumbers from outside the city. We also learned over the past several weeks from Housing Authority staff that Mr. Mazzola action have stopped all efforts to repair public housing sites and make them safe, and that Mazzola have told Housing Authority individual directly that he will withdraw his action against the authority if Mayor Lee reappoint Mazzola to the Airport Commission. Second, we have heard from individuals employed at the San Francisco Airport that no ethics investigation ever occurred, into the revelation that last year that Commissioner Mazzola had sought to secure employment opportunities for his family member and no influence promotion of his family members to the exclusion of minorities that work at the airport. We understand that this is nepotism and undue influence is ongoing. We therefore request that the Ethics Commission promptly launch immediately investigation into both of these allegations regarding the improper use of Mazzola's status as the Airport Commission, one to seek personal gain by holding the well-being of thousands of predominantly Black and Asian Pacific Islands public housing residents hostage until he gets his reappointment, and two, violate the city ethics law against promoting airport employment opportunities for family members as a sitting airport commission. Thank you, Espinola Jackson. I just want, and I got through it even though I handing out these papers, and I hope you read this and understand there's a great concern. It's also a tenet that is here because we have in this city positions, but they are not federal or state certified compliance officers. So we having problems that has not occurred in the last few years. Thank you so very much. You all have a blessed day.
Before I begin, I'd like these handed out to you. I'm Patrick Minette-Shaw, here on my own time, as always. On Friday, August 15th, I received a letter from Executive Director John St. Croix dismissing my second SIA complaint against Task Force member David Pilpel. St. Croix's letter dismissing the second August 4th SIA complaint only cited section Roman numeral 3.A.1, activities that conflict with official duties. But Mr. St. Croix made no mention in his dismissal letter, section Roman numeral 3.B.1, restrictions that apply to officers' employees in specified positions. 3B1 states, unless otherwise expressly permitted by state or local law and regulation, no officer or employee may assist, advise, or represent other persons or entities. That entity would be you. Mr. Pilpel was clearly engaging in providing advice to the Ethics Commission concerning a sunshine complaint that may well have reappeared in front of him, in front of his jurisdiction, inside the scope of his duties. He had no business speaking to you on July 28th about the Micah Ringel case before you that. As both of my SIA complaints against Pilpel illustrate, he appears to be engaging in ex parte communications with you, defined as a communication in a quasi-judicial proceeding raised by one person in the absence of and without representation or notification to other interested parties, say the Sunshine Task Force, that he was here to sway your judgment. Indeed, the Ethics Commission's own regulations for investigation and enforcement, Roman numeral 8, section 8.A, says that once a complaint is filed, no Ethics Commission staff member shall engage in oral or written communications outside of a commission meeting. That same rule should apply to the task force members. In addition, the Sunshine and Ethics training video on the city attorney's website that Pilpel ostensibly has reviewed numerous times clearly indicates that the task force is an adjudicative body, and he should not be violating procedural rules such as bans on ex parte communications. For these reasons, I'm asking the Ethics Commission to calendar a discussion to reconsider the dismissal of my second SIA complaint and hear both of them expeditiously. I've been waiting for months for you to calendar a hearing on Mr. Pilpel, and it's way overdue, Commissioner Hurd. You need to move this along.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Huggins, and I'm president of the Holly Courts Resident Council. Holly Courts is 120 units of public housing up in Bernal Heights. I'm also the CEO of the new San Francisco Residents Union, where we support Section 8, SROs, senior disabled housing, and public housing. And I'm here to reiterate what Dr. Jackson has already said. We do need a total investigation of Mr. Mazzola. What he's doing, we believe, is illegal. You know, there's federal funds that come into this city, and when they come into the city, and if they come into public housing, there's something called Section 3, and I'm sure you're aware of it, where 25% of the residents need to be hired with those dollars, and 25% of the city workers. If there's a drop of federal money going anywhere, 25% of the surrounding area should be hired. What he's trying to do is eliminate that. Now, as you know, we're going through RAD, which is resident. It's an acronym. It stands for Rental Assistance Demonstration Project, where Holly Courts is number one. We're going through RAD. That's privatization of public housing. That's going to be Bernal Heights Community Center is going to be the managers for 99 years, along with bridge developers, and in partnership with the Holly Courts Resident Council, which is also known as the Holly Courts Resident Management Corporation. We're going to be able to do business together. We're going to be the model for the city so that public housing residents will know that there's someone out there fighting for their rights, because there's no one out there now except us, and that the Section 8 should be adhered to in this city. Now, I'm going to the colleges, Southeast Facility College. I've already spoken with their commission. I'm going back there again Wednesday to talk about bringing in a curriculum that would show residents how to become trained as property managers and get their PHM, which is a certifiable title. They will learn plan and organize work, supervise staff, supervise resident services, and so on and so forth. Back in the 90s, the formal Vice President Quayle came to the city, and he came to Hunter's View, and he was in total support of resident management and resident management corporations and owning public housing, residents owning their own public housing. So when he left, there were 20 residents hired, 12 out of that 20 went to work. I was one of them. I managed 7 developments here in the city for 7 years, and the others were put on a waiting list. And then we got dropped like we didn't even exist. So there are residents out there who are willing to do the work. They just need your support. And it's to be an ethical city, and you're the Ethics Commission, you need to look into this Mazzola issue, because this is not right and it's illegal. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is presentation by Information Technology Officer Stephen Massey regarding campaign finance data.
So do we need to tell them about the screen, or? Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Stephen Massey. I'm the Information Technology Officer. And tonight I'm going to demonstrate 3 data visualizations that I've been working on in anticipation of the upcoming election. The best screen to probably look at is this screen over here, because the screens on your desk are somewhat blurry. So we'll do the best we can to show this off. So the first data visualization, which you're probably already familiar with, is the campaign finance dashboards. We started this in 2012. This is the 3rd year that I've produced one of these. And it's an interactive web tool. It summarizes the campaign finance data that we have. And the entire site is built on open data. The second project?
Stephen, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Would you explain what that map is at the bottom of the page?
I'm going to go through each of the projects.
Sorry.
Yeah. The second project is a ballot measure dashboard. This one, we have done summaries of ballot measures in the past, but this one's different because it allows you to browse all the activity by only knowing just the measure letter. So you don't need to know the committees involved. You don't need to know the different contributors. It will display all that information as long as you know the measure letter and whether you want to look at the supporting or opposing side. The third project I'm going to go over is sort of a fun project. This one is called the Democracy Facts Label. It summarizes the activity by committee and allows you to look at the top donors to ballot measure committees. And it's based on this design that was done by Professor Justin Levitt of Loyola Law School. And so we've been working with him on this. But before I get into those projects, I think it would be useful to get a basic understanding of the infrastructure that we built this all on, because The infrastructure has actually taken us much longer to build than these data visualizations, so I think it's worth going over. We've had a contract with NetFile since 2007 to host our databases and electronic filing systems, and we have a very good working relationship with them. They host 4 systems for us: our campaign finance system, the lobbyist system, the Form 700 system, which most of you have used, and then the campaign consultants. We don't have electronic filing for that one, but they allow us to scan paper documents into their system. And then each of those systems has 3 components. There's a public access website. It lets people view the filings that come in, do basic searches of the data, and then download the data itself. There's also an electronic filing program that allows the campaigns or the lobbyists to fill out their statements. And then there's an administrative back end, and that allows us to manage the filings and assess fines and the different deadlines that each person has. The second system that we rely on is this DataSF open data system, and that is a citywide system that was set up a few years ago. It's a cloud-hosted database, and it allows city departments to publish publicly accessible data sets to the system and make them available for use. We synchronize all the NetFile data over to DataSF along with additional data sets. And we update that data daily or as needed. So what kind of data do we have up on DataSF? We have all the campaign finance transactions. That includes all the contributions that go back to about 1998. There's about 260,000 of them. We have all the lobbyist reports since 2010, the public financing disbursements. Campaign consultant reports, as I mentioned, those are on paper, but we actually type up a lot of that data and put it up onto DataSF so it's usable. We also post summaries of contracts that pertain to the pay-to-play provisions in Section 1.126 of CFRO. And then we also have a list of the enforcement summaries, and I think that goes back to about 2004. So what can you do with our data on DataSF? Well, there's sort of 3 ways that you can interact with it. There's this basic spreadsheet view that you can see on the web. It's sort of like looking at Excel. You can also download the data into a variety of formats if you have a particular software application you want to use to analyze our data. And then we have an application programming interface, and we've been working recently with Code for America because there are a number of programmers in San Francisco who've been very interested in working with our data, and they can actually build entire websites or software applications that analyze our data by using our data as the source data. And then whenever our data updates, their software application would update as well. But if you're not a programmer and you're just at the spreadsheet level, which is fine, you can actually do quite a bit. Using the website, you can aggregate our data, you can filter it. You can even build charts, graphs, and maps on it. So some of our dashboards use that functionality to build the charts and graphs. And the powerful thing about using this tool is that when new contributions come in, for instance, and let's say you'd built a graph that was analyzing those contributions, your graph would update automatically. You would not need to build a new graph every time new financial data comes in. And the last thing you do is you can mash up data. So you can take data from different data sources and put it together, even if the data source is from another department. So if, for instance, the city's geographic team posts a zip code map and we have data that aggregates down to the zip code level, you could combine that together to build a map. This is a chart that the mayor's office staff presented to the Committee on Information Technology that shows each department's contributions to the open data effort. And despite the fact that we're one of the smallest departments, we're basically the largest contributor by far. If you're wondering what the second department is there, that's data sets that were contributed where the department did not label what department they are when they posted it. So getting back to these campaign dashboards, so the way the dashboards work is they take the information from the state campaign forms that are filed with us, the lobbyist forms that are filed with us, and the campaign consultant reports, which we're compiling that data together. And we put it all together on one display. So how did people do this before we had these dashboards? I think it's important to get an idea of where we've come from. When I started in 2005, on a filing deadline, all the campaign reports came in on paper, and the reporters would come into our office and go into our public access room, and all the filings would have just come in, and they would sift through unorganized campaign filings and try and make some sense of it. Then in 2007, when we contracted with NetFile, we allowed people to download the data in large quantities and also search it. But one of the problems with search is it assumes you know what you're looking for before you run the search. The other problems with the data is that you need to understand the various codes in the data, which are defined by the state's campaign finance format. And then there's the element of, as Mr. Minardi likes to say, you're sort of drinking from a fire hose. I mean, there's 260,000 transactions. Trying to make some sense of it is difficult. So one of the things we wanted to do when building these dashboards is try and allow people to very quickly filter out the noise. And what I mean by filtering out the noise is that if you're looking at a ballot measure committee and they've received $500 million from one source, and then they've received 50 contributions, at the $100 level. If you only had a few minutes to look at it, you probably want to find the $500,000 contribution, not the smaller ones. So a lot of these dashboards focus on allowing you to see that information quickly. So let's try and take a look at it and see if you guys can read it from here. So this is our home page, and down here is a link to the dashboards. So this first view shows the activity in the 90-day late reporting period. So late contributions, they are disclosed when a committee receives contributions that total in the aggregate of $1,000 or more in the 90 days before the election. So that could be a contribution, a monetary contribution, an in-kind contribution, or a loan. So over on the left here, this box, we're showing total contributions per day. So you can't see down the bottom, but it's showing the dates and then the amounts. So the amounts are going up to about $500,000. And so right away you can see that there are about 4 peak days where large contributions were coming in. So there are a couple ways you can interact with this page. You can either click on one of the peaks, or you can filter it using the tools at the top. On the right here, it's very hard to see, but there's actually a map of California. And you can see some contributions here coming from the Bay Area, and then down the bottom there are some coming from the Los Angeles area. So let's click on one of the contributions. So I'm going to click on this first peak. And so there's $500,000 coming from the FC Pier 70 LLC Forest City Residential Group that's going to a committee that they're controlling. They loaned this committee the money, which was going to allow them to build if this measure passes, it'll allow them to build a project that they're trying to build. And then over here, it's zoomed in. You can't see it because of the contrast, but it tells you the zip code, and it zooms into the area in San Francisco where they're located. In addition, there are other ways you can look at this. For instance, at the top here, we have this tool which allows us to filter out by amount. So let's say we only want to look at contributions of greater than $100,000. So I can literally just drag this tool, and it'll reshape the graph and the list of contributions at the bottom. And now we're only looking at the larger contributions. So this is just a much faster way of getting this information than looking through 90 late contribution reports is what you would have to do if you were doing this from paper. The next section I'm going to go over are the candidate pages. So we built a candidate page for each race, and I'm just going to pull up the District 10 race because that's been a popular page during this election. And all the data that I'm presenting on this page is current as of June 30th. So there's been a lot of activity since then. It will update in early October when the committees file new financial statements. So on the left-hand side here, we list all the candidates who are qualified in this race, and that Supervisor Cohen is the incumbent. And on the right here, we have a map of the district, because not every person necessarily knows if they're in District 10. So up here, I can search and find if a particular address is in District 10. So I'm just going to type in an address, 123 Indiana Street. And so it zooms in on District 10, so we know that, okay, this address is in District 10, so this is the district that pertains to us. And then I'm going to go down here, and it displays two charts. One is the total expenditures by candidate committees and the total contributions to candidate committees. So it's probably hard for you to read the labels on these, but as of June, Malia Cohen had spent almost double Tony Kelly, who was the only other candidate who had spent any money as at that point. And she had raised over probably about $200,000 more than Tony Kelly or Marlene Tran, who were the other candidates who had raised some money. But since then, Tony Kelly and Marlene Tran have applied for public financing. So I expect in October this chart's going to look a little bit different. Below that, we have a list of all the contributors. So if you want to search this list, you can, or you can browse through it. So we've taken out all the contributions that don't apply to this race. And then below that, we have a map. And it's a little hard to see here, but this is a map of the Bay Area, the greater Bay Area. And it's showing all the contributions, where they're coming from, and it puts in red the areas where there's the most intense activity. So the most activity is actually coming from District 10. But what we can do is we can actually change the view to show contributions from a particular candidate. So if we switch this to Marlene Tran, we can see that she's only really getting her money from the west portion of, the south and the west portion of San Francisco. Tony Kelly, San Francisco as well. And then Supervisor Cohen is pulling in funds from all over the Bay Area. And we can actually zoom in on District 10. So these three zip codes, this one, and this one, are primarily District 10. So you can see that Malia Cohen is getting most of her support from this portion of the district here. But if we switch candidates, we can see that Marlene Tran is actually getting most of her support from the southern portion of the district. And then Tony Kelly is getting the majority of his support from the northern portion of the district. So you can do all this kind of analysis without downloading any of the data, which would actually take you quite a while to do this analysis. Keep going down the page. We track the expenditure ceilings in the race that pertain to public financing candidates, and then we also track the cash balances of these committees. And so we can see here that Malia Cohen, as of June, still had $175,000 in the bank, and all of her challengers had less than $1,000. So those are the candidate pages. Next section I'm going to go over is the public financing section. We're actually very transparent with this public financing program. We show the total dollars that we've dispersed to each candidate. So Tony Kelly, at this point, we've dispersed $98,000, and Marlene Tran, $41,000. And we update this daily. But we don't just disclose the totals. We actually disclose every check that we've cut to these candidates. We disclose the date that they requested the money and the date that we certified it and approved it. And if a candidate has requested money and we have not approved it yet, we also post that and show that it's a pending request. There are other sections on here that pertain to ballot measures in the June election, the primary, PACs, a whole section on consultants and major donors. I'm not going to go over those. But I'm going to go over the last section, lobbyists and their contributions to candidates. So because the lobbyists are required on a monthly basis to report any of the contributions that they are making, arranging, or delivering to candidates for local office, we built this chart, which on the left here is listing all the candidates to local office in November. And then on the right here, it shows all the firms. And what you can do is you can actually mouse over any candidate, and it will display the firm and how much money they've been giving. So we can see here that Mark Farrell has received the most money arranged by lobbyists. And just to pick on him, what I can do is I can actually click a search box at the bottom. This chart is actually interactive, so I can just type in Farrell. It'll rebuild the chart so that we can look at some of these smaller lines and see which firms are giving the smaller amounts as well. And let's say I was mousing over this and I see, okay, there's this $4,500 contribution from the San Francisco Association of Realtors. So let's say I want to do a little more research on that. Well, all I have to do is at the bottom, I can just type in Realtors. It'll rebuild the chart. It'll show me all the candidates that have received contributions from the San Francisco Association of Realtors. So in addition, we have Supervisor Tang and Supervisor Weiner. If this chart, piques the interest of the user, they can actually do additional research, and they don't have to trust my numbers. They can click a box at the bottom. It'll take them over to the city's Data SF website. They can either work with my chart, or it'll tell them what I based this chart on, and it'll actually take them to the original data set with all the contributions since 2010, which they can download and build their own charts on top of. So it's quite a powerful tool, but it still simplifies it so that you can filter out the noise in the sense that there's so many contributions from lobbyists in our database, and this allows you to get to the answer much quicker. So those are the campaign dashboards. The second dashboard that I've been working on is this ballot measure dashboard, and this is the one that allows you to look at the activity by measure without knowing any of the committee names involved. In addition, I wanted to be able to answer a series of questions that are quite common with the campaign finance data. One of them is, so what measures are on the ballot? Which committees support or oppose each measure? Who's contributing in support or opposition of each measure? Who do the contributors work for? Where are the contributors from? Who's making loans to the committees? And who's making in-kind contributions? So let's take a look at it. So on this page, and this dashboard, I should say, we're not going to post this until October when we get complete data, because at this point, most of the committees formed after the semi-annual statement was due. So this is sort of a sneak peek at how this is going to work. At the top here, we have a list of all those questions that I just read off on the presentation. And then at the bottom here, we have a list of all the measures. And what I can do is I can click on one of these questions. So for instance, which committees support or oppose each measure? So I can click on it, and it'll display each committee on the left here, and their position is indicated by color. So supporting committees are always labeled with orange, and the opposing committees are always labeled with blue. On the right here, I have a tool where I can change the measure I want to look at. So all I have to do is click on the measure, and it'll rebuild all the charts based on the measure I chose, and show me the committees and how much they're raising, how much they've spent. It shows me their current cash balance and then how much debt they have. The next question I have up here is who's contributing to ballot measure committees. So one of the problems is, again, filtering out that noise. So how do you find those high dollar contributions? What this chart represents is the total contributions from all contributors who are supporting or opposing the measure. And then they're labeled by color, whether they're supporting or opposing contributions, and then the size of each contributor indicates the amount of their contribution. So the measure we're looking at right now is measure H. So we can see here that about 2/3 of the total contributions are coming from 3 people. And you probably can't read it on there, but they're actually all coming from the same family. So we have 3 people coming from the same family, and then on the supporting side, we have 2 people coming from the same family representing this section. Now, the system will still allow you to mouse over some of these smaller ones, and it will reveal the names of those contributors. But the point of this really is to see these large contributors and who's driving these measures. For instance, if I click on a different measure, this is measure L, the transportation measure, we can see that 2/3 of the money is actually coming from one person. And we allow you to further look at this by looking at who do the individual contributors work for. So if you have multiple contributors who are all working for the same company, it will represent that company in its own box here. So 2 of the 3 contributors that we're opposing actually work for the same company. We also show where the contributors are from. So right now you can't see it because this is a map of the entire United States, but actually the contributors supporting Measure H, some of them are coming from New Mexico, some of them from Colorado. There's about 20,000 coming from there. And then if we zoom in on San Francisco, we can see that also a large amount of money is coming from around Golden Gate Park, which would make sense because Measure H relates to athletic fields in Golden Gate Park. And just by clicking on a different measure, it will rebuild the map and show where the money is coming from in San Francisco or outside of San Francisco, like, for instance, this one's coming from Marin. We're also showing the loans the committees are receiving. So here's where we see, for instance, on Measure F, this is the $500,000 loan. We can see it hasn't been paid back. And we also reveal who the lenders are. And then the last thing that we show are any in-kind contributions. So for instance, on Measure F, we have about $70,000 donated by the developer. They donated employee time of $70,000. So that's the campaign, or that's the ballot measure dashboard. I think it's going to be a lot easier to do the research than looking at the data. One of the problems with the data is ballot measure committees are required by law to change their names relatively frequently. When they receive large donations, they may become the top donor, so the name of that individual needs to go into the name of the committee. Also, when the letters are assigned to the measures, the committees have to change their names. So it's good for putting on the communication so that the person reading the communication knows who the top donors were at the time. The downside is it makes it very hard to do data research. So this solves that problem for the person who wants to do that kind of research. Okay, so the last dashboard is Democracy Facts Label. So again, this was designed by Professor Justin Levitt of Loyola Law School, and he published it in a paper confronting the impacts of Citizens United in the Yale Law and Policy Review in 2010. And so he tries to, in this paper, parse some of the fears of corporate expenditures. And one of the ideas he explores is that corporations will spend enough on speech to cause voters to elect candidates preferred by the corporations. So he asks the question, does quantity of speech change voters' mind? So he brings up voters may equate quantity of speech with the breadth of support. Repetition of a message might cause voters to put more faith in arguments than deserved. Or it's possible that substantial massive speech is an unstoppable electoral force. So he says the campaign finance regulator would argue that disclosure is what would combat these issues. But one thing he points out is that disclosure reports come across on these financial statements, which go to a central source, and it's hard to filter out the noise of those statements because there's so much on them, and they're complicated, and voters don't necessarily have the time to look at those reports or look through all that data. So he argues for this straightforward disclosure label that would be put onto communications that's modeled after the nutrition label. So he calls it this nutrition facts label for democracy. And his label was focused on PACs that would be spending money affecting candidate races. But what we did is we focused it on the ballot measure races. And what he argues is that it would provide an alert to voters that a large quantity of speech is potentially coming from just a few entities. So if you saw a label that said, let's say you received a mailer and it said it was only supported by 3 people, you could assess, okay, there isn't exactly a lot of popular support for this measure. Also, the portion of financial support that's generated by the top X, 5 contributors, for instance. So you can see if the majority of the money is coming from only a few individuals. So this is our version. We made a few changes, which I'll go over. And let's take a look at it. So this is the Democracy Facts label. And on the side here, I have a list of the committees that had filed as of the June deadline. And so what I can do is I can actually just click on one of the committees, and it'll rebuild the label and show us who the top contributors are, how many supporters there were, the total contributions they received. So this is one thing that we changed. In the original version, it showed the percent from the top 5. But one thing that I felt was important was you don't necessarily know, if you're just looking at a list of top 5 contributors, if the top contributor and the 5th contributor are contributing in the same league. You might assume that they are, and that's not necessarily the case with a lot of these measures. For instance, on this one, we can see Sean Parker here contributed $49,000 of the total $72,000, and the 5th contributor, Barbara Kaufman, on here, who contributed $1,000, just so happens to be on the top 5, but is not really in any comparison to Sean Parker. And because we're doing this on a computer and not on a communication label, we built in this functionality here. So if you click on Sean Parker's contribution, we can actually run a search and it'll Google who's Sean Parker. So it tells us he's an entrepreneur who co-founded Napster. So again, just to say, web searches are only as good as they can be, but at least it'll give you a start on identifying some of these people. So we can, again, click on some of these measures here. Yes on C has 94 supporters as of June. Yes on E, 79. And then we get to San Franciscans for Safe and Affordable City, and they have 4 supporters. So if you received a communication and it had a label like that, then and it was closer to the election, when more of the reports had come in, it might send a warning flag. So the campaign finance dashboards, those are available now on our website. Those, again, focus on the candidate races. And then the Democracy Facts label and the ballot measure dashboards, those will be released after the first pre-election filing deadline in early October. Are there any questions?
Commissioners? Any questions? I have a couple. First of all, Mr. Massey, I think this is really excellent. I mean, I think one of the great tools of democracy is being able to see in as close to real time as possible what is going on with contributions and supporters, and I think it's going to be a real asset for the city. A couple questions for you. One is regarding the integrity of the data. What are we doing as a city or as an ethics commission to ensure that the data that's being stored is being protected? I know that people can download it and manipulate it, but what are we doing to make sure it doesn't get compromised?
Well, nobody on the commission staff actually has permission rights to modify any of the data. We can assist filers with completing the forms, but once they submit it, it goes over to NetFile system and it's locked. And every city in California at this point that's doing electronic filing, with the exception of Los Angeles, is going through the same process. And so they won't actually do anything to their systems unless they receive written requests from us.
So is NetFile responsible for maintaining the integrity of the data?
Yes.
Do you know what they do to ensure that it's not hacked or compromised?
Well, first of all, they keep an enormous number of backups. So, I'm not particularly concerned about the integrity of the data in that we have so many snapshots of it. On top of that, there are so many different components to it. There's the actual filing itself, which we store the original electronic filing. Then there's the database of the transactions. So if anyone ever questioned the transactions in our database, they could go back to the original source file that we received, and we log every step that those filings take when they go through our system. So we even know if someone just hit in the electronic filing system, if they just hit the submit button and it didn't go anywhere, we know that information. So I feel quite confident in the security of the system.
Okay. What about traffic? Do you feel like it's equipped to handle the type of traffic you would expect during a hotly contested election?
Are you asking about NetFile system?
Yeah, well, our particular dashboards.
So the dashboards run on a distributed network where the service provider that we're using wouldn't really run into that problem. And then NetFile's one of the things essentially that we're paying for that we were unable to provide with the city-built system that we had years ago is that infrastructure to handle the filing deadlines. When we were on a city-built system, we had one server, and now we have a variety of servers at a facility to handle the traffic. So that hasn't really been an issue for us.
Okay. And finally, where has this been implemented anywhere else?
So I've actually also been working with Oakland, and I helped them get started on a project where they wanted to build data visualizations for the mayor's race. But they only have, I think, 2 people on staff right now. So they actually got a community group in who did the website work. But no, the state is not doing this, and no other cities are doing this.
What, if anything, are we doing to promote these new dashboards to the public?
Well, so definitely with the Democracy Facts label, we're working with Justin Levitt to help promote this, and we're going to do all we can to get the word out, whether it's through our website or social media.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Public comment on item number 3.
And compliment the Ethics Commission, but that was a very good presentation. I'm glad to see the Democracy Dashboard. My compliments to you. I have, unfortunately, used, Open Data SF on a number of occasions, and it's buggy. So if this is running on your servers and not theirs, that would be encouraging. One of the problems I had with Open Data SF going into the city controller's vendor file, I would search for RTZ Associates to find out how much they had been paid to develop a database for Laguna Honda Hospital. And I only got from 2007 to 2014. So I emailed Ms. Zamuda, who was kind enough to track down the data from 2003 to 2007. And the reason it hadn't shown up on the first time was because the company had initially submitted data with spaces between each of the letters in their acronym, and later they stopped doing that. And at other times they had comma Inc. following the name. Ms. Zamuda remarked to me in a private email that sort of filtering was inexcusable, and the system should have been able to catch all of it and report it right at the beginning. over the weekend, I was trying to use the budget feature on Open Data SF, and when I'd go to the export to Excel button, it died. It wouldn't work. So although I'm glad to see the city moving towards getting some data sets on a central website, there are definitely technical hurdles that need to be looked for proactively. Other than that, I was very impressed with your presentation.
Mr. Manette Shaw, I'm going to remember this day.
We also enjoyed what we heard here, technology-wise. My only question is at the second window. I don't know if you could put it back up or if you unplugged it or what you did. Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about the second window where you had the graph up that said undefined, and you didn't know what the answers were there. That bothered me a lot. Also, where you had the graphic up where you said only 4 people voted or supported some legislation, only 4 people. I'm afraid that you would really try to change the minds of the voters, and get into their head because they see that 4 people only voted for that. That bothers me quite a bit. But I would love to see this system put out into the communities before voting so they could understand voting better. This is an educational system. But those 2 areas that I hit on need to be tweaked, and they need to come forward and have full disclosure. Because why are you having a graph that says undefined and it's almost as long as what the first one was?
I would just point out that graph is not ours. It's the city's, and it's a list of contributions, so it's not compiled by the Ethics Commission.
Oh, I see.
It's just representing that. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I see.
so when the mayor's staff presented that chart of the contributions to the open data system, and they're talking about contributions, I say, as the number of data sets that departments had been posting to the system. One of their points was that there were a large number of data sets that had not been labeled. So that was actually...
Why not?
That was something that they wanted to correct. So departments were posting information, but they weren't properly describing the information that is posted. So, again, this is something they're focused on correcting. And this was back in the spring when this came up. So they've actually been working on this.
So you're just working with what they gave you, that sort of thing, right?
Well, yeah. I mean,
basically, you're working with what they gave you.
Right. That was the chart they presented.
So hopefully this commission could ask them to give them more and be more, open to everything, fully disclosed. Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is discussion and possible action on the annual report.
Before the commissioners discuss this, I just want to point out one addition I made that you don't have at Commissioner Rennie's suggestion. At the very end where we have future initiatives, I added an additional bullet point, and it reads, the Commission agreed with several recommendations in the recent civil grand jury report and will work to implement these measures in the near future and will review the progress made 6 months after the date of adoption. That's, I put it in there at the Commissioner's suggestion, but technically this report ends in June and that action didn't happen until August. So it's outside the scope of this report. So it's up to you folks if you want to leave it in.
Yeah, my concern was that we had just recently said there were certain things that the grand jury had recommended, and we said we were going to look into them and take some action. And somebody reading this annual report where it says future initiatives is going to say, where are those? And that was my concern, is that, well, but I understand what you're saying is that the report ends of June 30th, and that action was in next year's report.
Yeah.
although it seems a little
Well,
a little strange that when you're talking about future initiatives for the next year, that the things that we've now said we're going to do. So I think I think there should just be some reference, and I think what you had suggested is fine.
Okay.
That makes sense to me. So, commissioners, hopefully we've all had a chance to review the report. The thought was we would go through the sections, and if any commissioner had a comment or question, we could address it, and then take public comment. Does that sound reasonable? Commissioner Keene?
Yeah, I just have first one thing to point out in regard to a mistake on dates, that if we could correct that. On page 19, having to do with the dates of my service, where it says 10/2013 to 2/2013. That should be to 2/2014. And then also where it says 3/2013 to 2/2020, that should be 3/2014 to.
I apologize for that.
Yeah, that's all right.
We've reviewed this several times, but even today I found a typo.
That's
so.
that's all right. So if that change could be made.
Any other changes from the commissioners or areas that you'd like to discuss? I had some questions in the investigations and enforcement section, beginning on page 12. Particular, I have some questions about the paragraph, the first full paragraph on page 13, where it begins, "The Ethics Commission has the authority to investigate complaints." And my first question has to do with the volume of complaints that were under review. It seems like there was a pretty substantial drop in the number of pending or new complaints that were under review by the Ethics Commission. Do we understand why that is?
I think for a long time we had a backlog of complaints, and we spent a good portion of that year trying to catch up with them, and did that with a lot of older things that were pending. So some of those 146 probably had been held on from a year, 2, maybe even 3 before that.
Okay. And then it says that 78 were resolved during the fiscal year, so that's 78 of the 99 were resolved?
Right.
And 63 of them were resolved because they weren't within the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission?
Or that they, the preliminary review determined that there wasn't enough to pursue a formal complaint.
So we only investigated 15 then, complaints?
New ones, yeah. I'm sorry. No, when you get a complaint before it's dismissed, there's still a preliminary investigation, and that would involve any evidence that's presented and a review of what potential evidence might be out there. This could happen in a day. It could take a few weeks, and very rarely it would take longer than that.
Okay, so then of the 78 that were reviewed, 15 went further than that initial review of evidence.
That's right.
On average, how long does it take to address those 15 complaints that go past the initial evaluation?
I would say usually 3 to 6 months. Some of them have taken years.
On average, they take 3 to 6 months.
I think so. Catherine, do you have anything to add to that?
I think the average would be a little bit higher than that. I think it would be closer to 9.
So then, of the 21 actions that were not resolved, those were not ones that could be determined not to be within the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission or warrant further action, or were those ones that the Commission just never was not able to get to at all, even to determine which bucket they fell into?
I'm sorry, which ones are you referring to at this point?
So just doing some simple math here,
Yeah.
it looks like there are 99 that could have been worked on. 78 were worked on, right? Either by determining that they weren't within the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission, they didn't warrant further action, or they were more significant complaints that were ultimately resolved. Right?
Okay, right.
So I want to know what happens to those 21 remaining.
They're still pending?
They're still pending. Do they get rolled over into the coming year?
Correct.
So when we're looking at this for next year, that number is going to include the ones that were left over from this year?
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions on that section from the commissioners? I also had some questions on page 14. In particular, I had some questions about section 4.130, number 4. And number 4 refers to the number of investigations the Ethics Commission conducted. And the answer is 0. Why is that?
This section refers specifically to complaints that are filed under Chapter 4, which is the whistleblower retaliation protection. And so we may have received complaints that alleged certain violations of sections within that chapter, but none made it to a full investigation.
So what does that mean? That they weren't within the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission?
Or it could be that there was no evidence or reason to believe that a violation of that particular section alleged occurred.
So when this refers to the number of investigations the Ethics Commission conducted, that does not include investigations that were conducted but didn't lead to a formal complaint being prepared?
It didn't lead to a formal investigation, so it may have been in the preliminary review phase.
For example, a lot of our whistleblower retaliation complaints come from people who are not city employees and who have never been city employees. So that would automatically render it outside our jurisdiction.
Right. So I understand those. Do we know how many we received? Whistleblower complaints?
Yes, it's in the, I'm sorry.
Oh, I
It's
see. That's
21.
21 were received. And so we determined that I see. So 18 were outside the jurisdiction. 3 will refer to the Civil Service Commission.
Or other departments.
Mm-hmm. What does, oh, I see. Okay. I was confused by what number 2 was referring to, but I think I'm now following it. Are the number of whistleblower complaints, have they changed significantly over the course of the last few years?
I don't know.
Looks like it was 19 the year before.
From my memory, it seems about the same, but I don't really have a firm number for you over many years.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners on that section? I had one more under the advice and opinion section. So this says that the commission is charged with interpreting and applying the campaign, lobbying, and governmental ethics laws under its jurisdiction, requiring that it consider requests for waivers, which it routinely does, and that it issue formal and informal written advice on matters requiring interpretation. And then we say that commission staff is available each workday to answer public inquiries about city campaign, lobbying, and governmental ethics laws. During the course of the year, the number of inquiries runs into the hundreds. So why don't we put together some formal or informal written advice if we're getting that many calls?
Well, if that refers to individual requests. We had no request for formal written advice the year of this report. Formal written advice, somebody asks for a specific case that they're involved in, and we give them advice if they ask for it. In that case, the commission has to vote on whether or not to endorse that advice, and it gives them a measure of legal immunity in case they're ever the subject of a complaint. By the same token, informal written advice is either an email or a letter that the staff would send to someone that says, this is what we think your individual situation warrants. You know, you should do this, or you can do this, or you shouldn't do this. That doesn't provide them any kind of protection, other than to say, well, I did check with the Ethics Commission, so they have a record of it. And then in terms of the regular inquiries, we get emails and lots of phone calls every day on really basic stuff. You know, and even though all the manuals and everything cover that, when people sit down at their computers to do campaign filings, or if they have a question about a gift, they don't think to go to a manual, they call us. And staff is involved in a great deal of that.
Understood. So we can't give formal written advice unless it's requested?
Yeah. That's the way it's written.
Okay. Okay.
Commissioner Huff?
Yes.
Jesse Minardi, Deputy Executive Director. But we do have a lot of manuals, for example. So that's, oftentimes if calls come in, we'll walk through the rules with folks, and we try to answer their questions as directly as possible, letting them know all the time that this is, informal advice we're giving you. But we do, like, for instance, the lobbying manual with the update of the regs that are effective on the 26th, so at the end of this week. We're going to have the lobbying manual, which tries to get into a lot of details, a lot of specifics. So there is a lot of written guidance out there. A lot of times it's just, people don't want to find it. They want somebody to talk to, which is understandable. So, we try to help them out.
Thank you. That's helpful. If there are no other comments or questions from the commissioners, I would open it up to public comment.
Good evening, Commissioners and Mr. St. Croix. I'm Dr. Derek Kerr, a whistleblower. I'd like to thank Mr. St. Croix and the staff for including data about whistleblower and retaliation complaints in the annual report. There's 2 years' worth of data there. And also for sharing additional details with the Citizens General Obligation Bond Oversight Committee that oversees the Controller's Whistleblower Program. That refers to Mr. St. Croix's letter of 9/12/14. But there's still a shortcoming in this data. The city code requires reporting, quote, the number of disciplinary actions taken by the city as a result of complaints made to the Ethics Commission, unquote. Your annual reports, the two of them, cite the number as, quote, unknown, unquote. From the viewpoint of whistleblowers, unknown is tantamount to buried. Mr. St. Croix gave Gobach 2 reasons for not knowing the outcomes of 9 retaliation complaints that were referred to the Civil Service Commission and other agencies. The first reason is that other departments are not required to report their results to ethics. Second one, Mr. St. Croix expects that, quote, reporting would not occur in the future as it would be a personnel matter, unquote. Well, you should ask these other agencies before claiming that the result is unknown. Just ask. And all they have to tell you is whether the complaint was substantiated, yes or no, and whether disciplinary action was taken, yes or no, nothing else. When we see numbers instead of unknown, then we'll know that whistleblowers are taken seriously by the Ethics Commission. The fact that ethics has never reported a sustained retaliation complaint since 1993 is not credible. Thank you.
Patrick Manetshaw, I'd like to echo Dr. Kerr's concern about the number of disciplinary actions taken by the city as a result of complaints made to the Ethics Commission. I would assume that it's within your authority that if you receive a complaint that was made directly to the Ethics Commission and you farm it out to another city department, that when you submit it to them, that you should be within your jurisdiction to ask them to report to you the outcome of it. As Dr. Kerr suggested, it can be a minimal outcome, sustained, dismissed, disciplinary action is taken or not taken, but unless you ask those departments for that information, they're not going to, walk it over to your front door. So I would recommend that you implement a policy, if you don't already have one, to start asking them when you send them a referral to report back to you on the outcome of it. I don't think that would be a violation of anyone's personnel law rights. And it's certainly within your jurisdiction and your responsibility to the Board of Supervisors to educate the Board of Supervisors on the data that they're asking you to provide them. So I'd ask you to expand your work on that area. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Dr. Espinola Jackson. I want to thank you, young man, for that report. It was beautiful. And I want you to make a little note for me so I can know how to get into it, because that's some information I want. But I also would like to find out, are you all going to take an action on what I presented to you tonight, this evening, I'm saying tonight, concerning the Mazzola? So that's the reason why I stayed, to see was any action going to be taken. Are you going to vote on anything this evening? Thank you so very much.
I would just note that because that item is not on the agenda that was published ahead of time, it's not something we could take any action on tonight. And the regulations regarding complaints have a certain procedure, and they specifically say you cannot file a complaint at the Ethics Commission. So if you wish to file a formal complaint, our website will walk you through what you need to do to actually do that.
I mean,
We can help.
Can we
the
help
staff
her?
can help. Of course.
Thank you.
If you call the office, the staff will be happy to walk you through it.
Is there a motion to adopt the annual report as amended to fix the dates to Commissioner Keene's service and to add the amendment proposed by Vice Chair Rennie?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. That passes 3-0. The next item on the agenda is discussion and possible action regarding a complaint received or initiated by the Ethics Commission and a possible closed session. Public comment on item number 5. Is there a motion?
Wait a second.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a motion to go into closed session per the Charter, the Brown Act, and the Sunshine Ordinance to discuss the matter as an anticipated plaintiff in litigation?
Also move.
Second. On the matter relating to litigation. Oh, yes, I second it on the matter relating to litigation.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. That it passes. So we will move into closed session to discuss the matter of potential litigation as a plaintiff.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.
Good evening. We are back in open session. Is there a motion to keep confidential the discussion we had about potential litigation as plaintiff?
So move.
Second.
Public comment.
I didn't hear what the motion was.
A motion to keep confidential the discussion we had in closed session about potential litigation as a plaintiff. To keep it confidential. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that motion passes. The next item on the agenda is discussion and possible action regarding the minutes of the commission from July and August. Any comments or questions from the commissioners? I just had one. In the August 18th, 2014 minutes, on page 5, there's a paragraph describing what I was saying near the bottom, and the last sentence said, Chairperson Herr suggests revisiting the issue in 2015. I think I said either early 2015 or February 2015. I remember it being near the beginning of 2015.
I can listen to the tape again, and
Okay.
I actually have a memory of that as well. So
Okay,
let me.
great. Thank you. Public comment on the minutes?
On the July 28th minutes,
Yes.
I want to remind
Or
you.
August.
I'm sorry, what?
Or August, either one.
Okay, so I want to remind you that it was at the July 28th meeting at which Mr. Pilpel inappropriately addressed you. That was my second complaint that he had violated the SIA. I filed the initial complaint on June 22nd. It's been 4 months. Commissioner Herr, I would really request that you calendar as soon as you can hearing both of my complaints, or at least the one that has not been dismissed. And while you were in closed session, it occurred to me that I neglected to mention one small point on your annual report. I believe, and I didn't go fishing for it when I came back in here, but I think there's a reference in there, something about part of the delay on rolling out or part of the troubles encountered rolling out the Form 700s that went live this year was in part due to departmental filing officers. And I'd like you to review that clause, because my understanding is that department filing officers were not allowed to assist submitting them online, that it was only the Form 700 filer themselves who could get a password and create the account. If the departmental filing officers were not allowed to help with that part, I don't think it has any business being in your annual report suggesting that part of the problems encountered were due to departmental filing officers. Thank you. You may want to go back and amend that discussion.
no other public. Is there a motion to adopt the July and August minutes as amended?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, that motion passes 3-0. Next item on the agenda is the Executive Director's Report.
I just quick point out, I'm sure you noticed the contingency plan in the budget. I'm mostly sanguine that this is not going to happen. If we have to absorb this, we will. It will not be particularly pleasant, but we can work it out. A budget cut that size. As has been suggested, we've started including enforcement summaries in this report, which are already available on the website, but it's one other place to put them out there for the public. And then I just note that the presentation that Stephen made with Jesse at the Code for America, these folks are very, very interested in what we're doing. And one of the great things about this kind of interaction is they are helping to get the word out. So it's a great boost for our outreach efforts.
How was it, Jesse?
It was great. I unfortunately had to bring my 2-year-old daughter, so I had to leave a little early. But Stephen was great, and I mean there were 40, 50 people there, all working very, very hard on our data. And Stephen fielded probably at least an hour of questions, and I mean I say it all the time, and he kind of gets mad at me, but I mean, it's just very, very impressive, as you guys saw, as everybody saw today. It was really interesting because it reinforced in my mind how much this is the way that campaign finance and lobbying disclosure is going, where people are expecting to be able to access the data online, manipulate the data. And yet the role that Stephen plays at this point in sort of that development is really important, because we had all of these really, really smart, tech folks there who were trying to manipulate our data but couldn't figure out, I mean, the numbers and all that sort of stuff, and getting it onto a computer they could understand. But what it meant, like what a Form 460 reported and all that sort of stuff, was still really difficult for them to understand. So it was Stephen was really great in sort of translating that, and that's why sort of what he did earlier today is so important, because he can help with that translation. So it was fun, and I felt a part of the tech world for a Saturday afternoon.
Commissioner Keene.
Yeah, could I just ask in regard to Mr. St. Croix, when you indicated that you were fairly sanguine about being able to absorb a budget cut. Are any of the staffing positions, like I understand there's an investigator position that's unfilled, do you have staffing positions now that are unfilled because of salary savings, attempts to meet your budget?
No. Could I clarify something?
Sure.
What I'm fairly sanguine about is that the cuts won't be implemented.
Okay. All right. I thought you were saying.
No, I'm not sanguine
fine
about it.
with me, cut our budget.
No. I'm not sanguine about that at all.
Okay.
No, if we have to do it, we will. The investigator position is open. We simply don't have the money. We have enough money to cover the rest of them. The city expects every department every year to come up with what they call attrition savings. It's a target built into our budget. Ours is $140,000 out of our overall budget. This comes from when somebody leaves and there's a gap between when those people leave and when their replacement comes. And if somebody takes unpaid leave or anything like that. So those targets are built in. I haven't had any problems with those tripping us up, because what happens is every single position in the budget is topped at the highest level that position classification can make, and not all of our people are at the top level. So that's where a lot of those savings come from. The budget exaggerates the salary account just a little bit.
No, I understand what attrition savings is, and that's not my concern.
But we just have the one position open, everything else is
But
full.
is that one position unfilled because of you're not having the money to fill that position?
Correct, absolutely correct.
Okay.
And we haven't had it for, last year, I'm sorry.
No, that's no, go ahead.
Last year, the board's ad back attempted to allow us to fill that position. But because we're doing 2-year budget cyclings, last year's budget had the money for the position and this year's budget didn't. And I didn't want to hire someone for a position that would terminate at the end of the fiscal year in which they were hired. Had the budget process yielded that funding again this year, I would have been, let me use the word sanguine again about filling the position. But the money didn't materialize, so it was there for, much of it was there for the fiscal year that's over. Okay. But it's not there in this fiscal year.
As we go through many of these meetings, oftentimes we talk about, or you talk about, the fact that certain actions aren't taken because of we don't have enough staff. We all hear that from you. And every department says that.
Sure.
And that's true. And so here we have a situation where we have a staffing need for an investigator. It's in the budget, but there's no money that's being apportioned by the city to pay for it. What are we doing to get the money?
Well, when we go through the appropriations process every year, the budget process, I shouldn't call it appropriations. I worked on Capitol Hill for too long, I'm sorry. We always request, like this year, our request included that position. But the mayor's budget office parses out who gets money based on their priorities, not ours. And then, although the mayor's budget office doesn't like it, departments go to the board and try to get an ad back, for additional funds for things they think they need. But the board's discretionary money is limited, and each individual member of the board has neighborhood priorities. So actually, we did get some money in an ad back from the board this year, but it was targeted helping us implement the new lobbyist regulations.
As I remember from my days in city government, and I did the budget for 20 years for the Public Defender's Office, whatever success that we ever had, whatever in regard to getting money for positions that were unfilled, the success always came from Harvey Rose's office in terms of lobbying them and getting it with the budget analyst's office before we get to the board, because by the time you get to the board, for the most part, they're just going to go along with the budget analysts. How much, to use a better word, well, I shouldn't use the term. I was going to say sucking up to, or working on Harvey Rose and the budget analyst's office do you do in regard to getting these, taking care of your budget problems?
I forgive me, because in my experience, Harvey Rose has never recommended an increase in anybody's budget, only cuts.
I got it often.
Well, that's news to me, actually. I mean, we do interact with them.
I know of many other departments as well. Maybe things have changed in the 15 years that I've been out of city government, but Harvey Rose was always the guy to backdoor and work on, and the budget analyst assigned to you was always the person to work on if you wanted to get something done. And that was not just the experience of any kind of particular adeptness I had in the public defender's office. The stories were legion about other departments as well. So you're expressing to me a certain amount of ignorance of that process. Yeah. is concerning to me, because the point is, the reality of San Francisco city government is that there's a lot of things that are done backdoor, and there's nothing wrong with it. And in terms of this is not an ethical process or anything like that in terms of lobbying the budget analyst. And so when I see a department, when I see a line item that's not filled because the money isn't there, my immediate instincts based upon the 20 years that I was in that situation of doing budgets is, what'd you do with the budget analyst's office? And for you to tell me, well, oh, no one gets anything from the budget analyst, you're wrong. And I would really advise you to start learning about that avenue and start going working on that aspect of it.
Well, I have to say I spend a good deal of the budget season every year defending my budget to the budget analyst so that they don't recommend cuts in it. And that's the process in my experience. And I don't want to use the term backdoor to describe anything the Ethics Commission does. I'll take your advice to heart and see what there can be done about it. But I spend a great deal of time with the mayor's budget staff and a great deal of time lobbying members of the board for this sort of thing. And it shows, because if you look at our budget today as opposed to when I started here, it's significantly different.
Well, okay, but there's nothing wrong with backdooring the budget analysts, because that's the name of the game in San Francisco, and indeed the budget analysts that I knew over the years, they expected you to come and lobby them outside of the process, not to just go ahead and send them your request for whatever you wanted in your budget and then argue it in front of the finance committee, because by that time everything's pretty much a done deal.
I appreciate that, but I've sat through budget hearings every year that I've been here, and I've never seen the budget analyst recommend an increase in someone's budget. So I'll have to go back and sort of look at how that works.
It works.
Okay. I would also point out that at the Board of Supervisors, when we were talking about the civil grand jury report, the Government Oversight Committee did discuss that it possibly during next year's budget season, they should, because of the civil grand jury recommendations, they should seriously look at giving us additional resources. So there is some
I saw that, and I think that's the kind of ammunition that you use in trying to get it's not, you're not asking for an increase. All you're doing is you're asking for a position that has been authorized to be funded. So we're not even talking about an increase in your budget. We're talking about funding something that is already there. And now that you've got something like the civil grand jury's statement that this should be put in there, I would use that to whatever extent you could, and use it very powerfully in regard to your discussions with the budget analyst in the budget process before you get to the actual finance committee matters. I don't want to lecture you like I'm a schoolmaster here. I'm uncomfortable doing this, but it was just that.
Actually, you are a schoolmaster.
I am a schoolmaster. I'm just a humble school teacher, really, actually. But I think there are things that can be done that, and I would recommend you think about them.
Public comment? Public? Items for future meetings. Anything from the commissioners? Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed, hearing none. Meeting is adjourned.